friends, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. I am out in my onion rows here. There's not a whole lot growing on in the garden in April, but the onions are looking fantastic, and I wanted to have this chat next to the onions because onions are famous for being great companions for many plants. So today we are talking about companion planting. Companion planting, in case you don't know, is basically this idea of planting certain crop categories next to each other for a mutual beneficial purpose, whether it be, and it's not strictly mutual benefit. There are categories that where the two plants benefit each other mutually, but then there are some that you are going to be planting as a trap crop where really you're going to be sacrificing one for the benefit of the other. This idea of companion planting, I think, comes from either crops that don't need the same nutrients, so that they're not constantly competing for the same nutrients that their neighbor is competing for, but also for pest deterrence. There are certain pests, obviously, that are attracted to certain crops, and if you can plant an herb or a flower or even a vegetable that deters the pest of its neighbor crop, then there's a mutually benefit there as well. So companion planting is going to be good for your garden overall. Now, one thing to note about companion planting is that there are far more beneficial pairings than there are things that you need to avoid planting next to each other. Now, with that said, there are just a handful of really bad pairings that you want to avoid in your garden. So I will going to talk about about 5 of them at the end of this video that you absolutely do not want to plant together. But to start out, I want to talk about 10 of the most popular and most effective, I think, in my personal opinion. There are tons. There are as many companion pairings as there are plants out there. So this is not an exhaustive list whatsoever. But in a vegetable garden specifically, I think there are 10 really effective companion plants that just go well with certain neighbors more than others. And so those are the ones that I want to talk about today. If you would like help planting a productive garden, scroll down to the description box of this video and click this link for a free garden printable. We calculated quantities for a year's supply of the most common garden vegetables and organized them into a neat chart to help you plan. We'll send it straight to your inbox. If you're new here, we invite you to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming tutorials on gardening and food preservation, food storage, and more. I took some notes so I don't get sidetracked and I don't forget, and hopefully I won't ramble too much. Okay, so number 1 is basil for tomatoes. Not only is it fantastic together on a caprese sandwich, but they grow great together in a garden. Basil is going to I think it deters the aphids and the whiteflies. Yes, it deters the aphids and the whiteflies away from your tomatoes. Now, I have heard that basil can even make your tomatoes taste better. Like there's some kind of chemical that they release in the soil that makes tomatoes taste better, but I have not been able to actually find any studies that prove that. And I have never personally experimented, done like an A/B experiment. I love doing side-by-side experiments in the garden, but I have never done one specifically for basil and tomatoes, so I can't really say for sure if they make tomatoes taste better, but a lot of people say that they do. A lot of people that I trust and that are more experienced than I am say that they do. But I know for sure that they help repel aphids away from your tomatoes. If you've ever grown you've ever grown tomatoes, you know that aphids are really attracted to tomatoes, and they will just suck that sap out of the leaves and cause tomato plants to wilt, which is not good. So basil next to tomatoes, those are one really good pairing in the garden. Number 2 is going to be green beans for corn. Now, if you've ever heard of the Three Sisters garden, which comes from the Native American culture of where they planted squash, corn, and something in the legume family, usually green beans. They planted those all in like one big mound near each other. And the idea is that one crop gives what the other crop needs. And with green beans and corn is a very heavy nitrogen feeder, which means it needs a whole lot of nitrogen in the soil to produce. Green beans, however, don't need a ton of nitrogen. They actually fix nitrogen into the soil, which means they actually keep that nitrogen in the soil. And when you plant green beans near corn, like right near the base of the corn, those root nodules that form on the roots of the green beans can help fix nitrogen to feed the corn that's planted right next to it. Another thing that you can try, I have never personally tried this, but I know people who have, and that is to plant the green beans close enough to the corn. Plant a pole variety of green beans, I should say, really close to the corn. Go away, Mr. Wasp. Plant the green beans really close to the corn and they will actually grow up the corn stalk as a trellis. Now, in order to do this successfully, you would want to, I'm just guessing, like I said, I haven't done this, but I know enough to know that you're going to want that trellis to be secure enough to handle the weight and the vining of the green beans. So you want to plant your corn a couple of weeks before sowing your green beans so that there's enough of a sturdy stalk there that the green beans can actually grow up your corn. And that's another way that you could save space in the garden too, where you wouldn't have to have a dedicated trellis just for your green beans. You could use your corn as the trellis for the green beans, which I think is pretty cool. I might want to try that someday. Okay, number 3 is going to be onions for carrots. So something that carrots suffer with big time is going to be the carrot fly. And it is like, I think it's the #1 pest it's the only pest, I should say, that I have personally had attack my carrots. I do think carrots have other enemies as far as pests go in the garden, but I have only personally had experience with carrot flies. I think they're called carrot flies because that is like the #1 crop that they attack. And that's just known. And if you're going to be planting carrots, you're going to need to either companion plant or have some sort of organic, natural pesticide approach to go ahead and take care of that problem, because it's going to be there. That problem is going to be there more than likely. So onions, like I said, onions are a good companion crop for so many things, especially carrots, because they repel the carrot fly. One reason why onions are such good companion plants is because of the aroma that they put out. You know, everyone knows onions are very aromatic, and onion plants, as they grow, are just as aromatic as the actual onion itself. If you have ever breaking the leaves don't hurt it, by the way. You can actually give your onions a haircut and they'll survive just fine. A lot of people do that so that it doesn't bend the stalk. Anyway, I'm rambling. But you can pinch off, if you've ever pinched off a stalk of an onion plant, it is so strong of an onion smell. They're delicious too, very edible. I will sometimes give my onions a haircut and then dehydrate those and use those as chives, even though they're not technically chives, but green onions, and just in my cooking and for garnishing baked potatoes, even sweet potatoes and stuff like that. But anyway, because they are so highly aromatic, they're a great companion plant for a lot of things, including carrots. Okay, number 4 is going to be radishes for cucumbers. So cucumbers are primarily attacked by cucumber beetles. Cucumber beetles are repelled, or actually they're not repelled. So this is an example of when you're going to be planting something as a trap crop in order to benefit another crop. So radishes are actually, they don't repel, they actually attract cucumber beetles. And I'm sure that there are people out there who love radishes way more than they love cucumbers, and therefore they would not want to sacrifice their radishes. But if you're anything like me, you're growing those cucumbers to put up pickles for the year. Your sweet relishes, your sweet pickles, your dill pickle spears, all of those things. And so I really need a good cucumber crop in order to get us through the year. So I'm totally fine with sacrificing some radish plants. Good thing about radishes is they are a rooting crop, so they're going to be growing down into the soil. They're not going to be competing for the same nutrients that cucumbers do, and they're not going to be obstructing the sunlight from the cucumbers. They're not going to be competing for nutrients. All they're going to do is sit there, grow, and the cucumber beetles tend to like radishes a little bit more than the cucumbers. Now, they're not going to stay off of your cucumber plants completely. That would be just way overshooting it if I were to say that. You're not going to completely eliminate cucumber beetles by planting radishes near your cucumbers, but you can drastically decrease the amount of pressure that your cucumber plants are under if you plant radishes right there near the base of your cucumber crops. Okay, number 5 is going to be carrots for tomatoes. So we talked about a good companion for carrots, but carrots themselves are good companions for other crops, including tomatoes. One of the reasons they are so good is because tomatoes release a chemical called solanine. I might be pronounced solanine, I'm not 100% sure. I'm gonna say solanine. But they produce that chemical that can also repel the carrot fly, because we already talked about how carrot flies attacked carrots. Well, solanine helps repel the carrot flies. So this is an example of a mutually beneficial relationship, because cucumbers, when they are planted at the base of your tomatoes, can help aerate the soil, right? They don't take up a whole ton of nutrients, especially they don't need a whole lot of nitrogen, which tomatoes do need a whole lot of nitrogen. But when you plant the carrots right near the base of the tomatoes, you are basically creating this tube that goes right near the base of that goes right near the root system of the tomatoes. Roots need air, and which is kind of odd because they're underground, so they're not really exposed to a whole lot of air, but you need aeration and oxygen to get into the root systems of your plants as much as possible. That's why loose soil, that's why we need loose soil. That's why you hear people like down in my area who have heavy clay soil. Woo! There's a frog nearby somewhere talking to me. Anyway, sorry, I get distracted by little animals that are cute, make cute noises. Oh, where is he? Okay, I've really got to focus. But I love frogs, and so do my children. I can hear him. Okay, carrots, aeration, tomatoes. Tomatoes help provide aeration, or carrots help provide aeration for tomatoes, because they're basically, that carrot is burrowing down into the ground and just creating some loose soil near the roots of your tomatoes. And then those tomatoes are releasing solanine that keep the carrot flies away from your carrots. So that's a perfect example of a mutual beneficial relationship for companion planting. Okay, number 6, let me turn the page here. Hey, Garfield. Number 6 is gonna be nasturtiums for your cabbage. So nasturtiums are actually an edible flower. They are beautiful, they vine, they have a vining habitat. You can plant them near a fence or a trellis and they'll train them up, but if you just let them grow on the ground, they're a fantastic weed cover, because, or a ground cover to help suppress weeds, because they'll just grow out on the ground and produce these big, beautiful, round leaves. The flowers, they come in all different colors. I love these salmon pink colors of the nasturtiums. I grow the Alaskan salmon variety. I just think they're beautiful, and they're a fantastic companion plant for cabbage because they help repel the cabbage looper and the cabbage worm. Now, I don't have as much of a problem with the cabbage looper as I have in the past, because I cover up my cabbage crops with tulle, basically. You can use insect cover, but tulle fabric works great too. And I have these frame structures that go over my cabbage, and if the cabbage moth doesn't have a chance to lay on the cabbage, it can't lay the cabbage egg, which then hatches into the cabbage worm, which then eats your cabbage plants. So that's how I personally protect against cabbage. But if you don't have that frame type structure, or you don't want to be dealing with that, try planting nasturtiums near your cabbage plants to try to repel those cabbage moths, cabbage loopers, cabbage worms. Okay, number 7 is going to be mustard greens for anything in the potato family. Ooh, sorry about that wind. So anything in the potato family is going to be your potatoes, eggplants, tomatoes, peppers. They're all kind of in this same class of crops. And the mustard greens help repel flea beetles. Now, flea beetles, I personally have had the most problems with flea beetles in my potatoes. I don't think I've ever had a problem with flea beetles on my peppers or tomatoes, but people do. So if you have a problem with flea beetles in your area, try planting mustard greens near the items that get attacked by flea beetles, which, like I said, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers. Now, I found a study where they actually found far more effective flea beetle repelling powers when they planted 3 different kind of spicier variety of plants in the brassica family. So the 3 that I wrote down is arugula, mustard greens, and Napa cabbage. So they had far better results when they planted them in clusters of arugula, mustard greens, and Napa cabbage, like in 3 little clusters, and interspersed that in with their potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers. And that had a far better flea beetle repelling ability than just planting like a whole row of mustard greens next to your whole row of tomatoes. So interspersing in clusters of 3 of those 3 plants had the best results, so you might want to try that. Okay, number 8 is going to be blue Hubbard squash, and I'm going to mention sunflowers too. So blue Hubbard squash and sunflowers together to repel or attract, I guess I should say, the squash bug away from your squash and zucchini plants. Now, blue Hubbard squash, obviously they're in the same family as all the other squashes. So squash bugs are just as attracted to them as they are your yellow straight-neck zucchini, yellow squash, your green beauty, black beauty zucchini. All of those are going to be squash bugs, and squash vine borers are going to be your two primary predators for those. But for some reason, squash bugs seem to be far more attracted to the blue Hubbard variety than they are to the yellow squash and zucchini plants. So in this case, the blue Hubbard is going to be a trap crop. It's going to be something that you're going to have to sacrifice. You're probably not going to get a good harvest, if a harvest at all, from the blue Hubbards. But if your primary goal is to get that yummy yellow squash and zucchini, then it might be worth it for you to plant the blue Hubbard and sacrifice that, and use that as like a magnet to take the squash bugs away from those crops that you really want. Now, I mentioned sunflowers. I learned this on accident 2 years ago when I planted I planted a row of sunflowers next to my squash, and I found far more squash bugs on the sunflower seed heads than I did on the squash, and it really helped knock down my squash bug population. Now, every single night, I had to come out with a bowl or a cup of Dawn dish detergent mixed with hot water. And what I did was I would go up to the sunflower heads, I would put that cup right in front of the sunflower head, and then I would tap the back of it, and those squash bugs would just fall right into that soapy water and they would die. And I would just go to each sunflower head, tap, 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 they'd fall in, and I would have to do that every night. So it was definitely a maintenance thing, not a plant once and forget it thing, but that worked incredibly well. So blue Hubbard squash and sunflowers, to attract those away from your regular, maybe more popular varieties of squash and zucchini. Okay, number 9 is sweet Alysum for your squash plants as well. So like I said, squash bug and squash vine borer. Now, I don't think squash vine borer is attracted to the sunflowers, so that's where your sweet Alysum is going to come into play, because they attract the predators that kill squash bugs. So number 1 is the parasitic wasps. So these parasitic wasps are attracted to the sweet Alysum, and those parasitic wasps feed on the squash vine borer. So if you can plant flowers and herbs that attract the eaters or the predators of the bug that you're trying to get rid of, that is one of the absolute best forms of natural pest control that there is. And then the other thing that it attracts is the damsel bug. Damsel bug loves these sweet Alysum flowers, and they feed on these squash bugs. So, and then another great thing that I just recently learned about, which was one of you commented in a previous video about how the sweet Alysum, or Alysum, I'm not 100% sure how it's pronounced, but kind of acts as like a ground cover, which I didn't know that. So that could also potentially help with weed control around your squash plants as well. That might be another benefit of companion planting with the two. Last but not least is cowpeas for corn. Now, we've already talked about how you want to pair a nitrogen fixing plant with a nitrogen feeding plant. So corn, once again, heavy feeding on nitrogen. Cowpeas are in the legume family, which means they fix nitrogen into the soil, which means they don't take it out, they help keep it in. So when you can plant cowpeas near your corn, you get that mutually beneficial relationship. But number 2, cowpeas are also a flowering pea plant, which means they produce flowers before the pod. So that means they're flowering constantly, all throughout the season. They're flowering. And those flowers attract the corn earworm, which can completely wipe out a corn crop. That corn earworm can knock out a corn crop so fast, but cowpeas attract the predators of the corn earworm. I'm not sure what that predator is. I wish I had taken the time to look that up for you, but you can just Google it. I just know that they do attract the bugs that eat the corn earworms. I'm just not 100% sure what those are. I'm kind of thinking they might be parasitic wasps, but I'm not 100% sure. But cowpeas for corn. Another thing, another crop family that flowers constantly throughout the season is anything in the pumpkin family. And so pumpkins are really good to be planted near corn as well, because of those flowering. The flowering nature of the pumpkins are attracting the bugs that eat the corn earworms. So that's another good benefit of planting those near corn. So I mentioned that I would talk to you very briefly at the end of the video about 5 never plant together type plants. Now normally that's not really that big of a deal. Like, I don't walk around in January when I'm mapping out my garden and think, oh no, I can't possibly plant this near this thing. It's not something to stress about, but there are certain plants that are known to release chemicals into the soil that can stunt the growth of other plants. Now, from what I understand, they have to be planted within 3 feet of the neighboring crop to have this effect. So if you have more than 3 feet of space in between these two items, I don't think it's going to be as much of an issue. At least that's been my experience. Maybe do your research on that and make sure, because I don't want to give you the wrong information. But from my experience personally, if something is planted more than 3 feet away, it's not going to have that stunted growth feature that makes them not good companions. Okay, so number 1 is going to be, don't plant sage next to your cucumbers, because that's one of those things where the sage releases some kind of chemical, I don't know what it's called, into the soil that can stunt the growth of your cucumbers. So never plant sage next to your cucumbers. Number 2 is dill. Never plant dill next to your carrots for the same reason. They release some sort of compound that stunts the growth of carrots. Now, my very first year that I ever tried to grow carrots, I got that information confused. I thought dill was like the best of the best companion for carrots. And I interplanted them within 6 inches of each other all throughout this entire like 50-foot long row. And I had terrible carrot results. And I was like, man, what happened? I thought the dill was supposed to produce this beautifully big carrots, but it's the opposite. Dill will stunt the growth of your carrots, so don't plant those together. Excuse me. Number 3 is don't plant your tomatoes next to your potatoes. So not only are they in the same family of crops, which means they're going to feed on the same nutrients, which means they're going to be constantly competing with each other, but even worse, they are both extremely prone to blight. And once blight comes into your garden, once it hits that particular area, you don't ever want to grow tomatoes or potatoes in that area ever again, or at least for many years. So blight is a very big problem. And when you plant things that are really susceptible to blight all next to each other, it's almost like it just invites that blight in. So you don't want to ever plant tomatoes near your potatoes. Number 4 is going to be sunflowers with potatoes. Now, sunflowers are very well known for releasing chemicals into the ground that can stunt the growth of plants nearby. For some of them, it has no effect. For others, it has a very big effect, and potatoes is one of them. You don't want to plant sunflowers near your potatoes because they will stunt the growth of your potatoes. Last but not least, number 5 is you don't want to put peas next to your garlic. Same thing. Some kind of chemical that the peas release will stunt the growth of your garlic. And now I have made this mistake in the past. Luckily, it didn't hinder the harvest size of my garlic because I don't think I had them planted close enough. They were about 3 to 4 feet away, but I had a whole row of garlic planted right next to a whole trellis of peas, sweet peas, because they both grow in kind of like the fall, cooler type weather. And I thought that was a great pairing, but it wasn't. So sweet peas can stunt the growth of your garlic if planted right near each other. So that's one that can that mistake can really easily be made because they both grow in the same type of weather conditions. So you would think they would be good companions, but they're not. Don't plant your peas next to your garlic. Okay, y'all, I hope that was helpful to you. 10 really friendly companion pairings in the garden and 5 items that you do not want to plant next to each other. That's it for today. We'll see y'all next time. Bye.